That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 50 of Only Human. Hard to believe, but a big milestone for us, and thanks for making it possible by tuning in so often. Today, the title of our podcast is The Art of Introspection. The Art of Introspection. And I want to do a little bit of a metaphor to get us thinking about this. Introspection is something I think a lot of us believe we understand, but maybe we don't fully appreciate. So imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cliff, facing a tough decision. You know, maybe you got one of those base jump things on and you're trying to decide, do I stay or do I go? And as you're looking at it, you realize how important that decision is for you. On the one hand, if you jump, you may be fulfilling a dream and proving to yourself that you're courageous and can do new things. And on the other hand, you look at the swirling winds and the ground down there and you're thinking, man, is this even worth it? Now I want you to imagine that cliff's edge is inside of you. Okay? It's the edge of your self-awareness. The place where we too often don't look before we leap. Today, we're going to make that leap. So I think we all understand pretty much what introspection is, but it's the process of examining our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own motivations, our plans. It's kind of about understanding who we are and why we act the way we do. It's also about understanding what drives us, what's our motivations, what frightens us, what are our fears. And all those things weave together until we decide how we're going to move forward or not toward our goals, our life goals, our daily goals, whatever they are. So all this leads us to our blue threat proverb of the week. And initially you might think it's kind of a weird one. It's number 16. Every post-game is a pre-game. As we talk about introspection, we're going to talk a lot about looking back on things that we did, right? Eventually, we're going to use that same skill to look forward, right? A post-game, in the military, we like to call it a debrief, right? Is an opportunity to sit down and walk through that game and walk through decisions and squeeze every lesson we can out of it. Because when we do that, even though the game's over, we could have been beaten badly or we could have won ridiculously easily. But when the game's over, there's nothing we can do to change that. And a lot of people will think that's a good reason not to debrief. Right? But the truth of the matter is more lessons are lost in the aftermath of a huge defeat that we never want to think about, or an easy victory that we don't believe is worth thinking about, than in any other way. And like I said, in the military, we realize that. We have after-action briefs. We study things. We put them into databases so that we don't make those mistakes. So blue threat proverb of the week, every post-game is a pre-game, sort of sets us up for this idea that the best time for introspection is immediately after some activity, when your memory's fresh, your emotions are still raw, and you just had a bunch of lessons that you might ordinarily miss. Okay? So let's look at why we are going into this, especially on this big kind of milestone episode. Why introspection, right? And I thought long and hard about this as well. I was introspective about what topic I wanted to use for episode 50. And here's the bottom lines. There are several key benefits about thinking about our motivations, our biases, our fears, our obstacles. And number one, feeds our whole purpose for this season. That's self-awareness. Socrates said it, and we've said it over and over again, knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. He nailed it, right? You cannot grow if you don't know who you are, where you are. You're growing from an unknown place, right? So the second thing beyond self-awareness is emotional regulation, right? It allows you to momentarily step outside of your emotions and assess your situation, your mindset, environmental factors, other people, your teammates, objectively. And that prevents knee-jerk reactions under pressure. We're going to give you a couple of examples of those here in a few minutes. And of course, when you're more self-aware and you can regulate your emotions, it brings us to the third thing: you make better decisions. So improved decision-making is the third real benefit of introspection. And if our whole purpose of our podcast is growing where we are with the resources at hand, man, these resources are right in front of us. It's sort of like tuning your internal compass before you decide which direction you want to go. So I told you we were going to give you some examples, and this is the deepest one we're going to go into. It's an example from an accident that occurred back in 2012, I think. So there's a lot of people on here who may not even be aware of it, but it's a story of Captain Francesco, I can never say his name right, Schettino. He was the captain of the Costa Concordia, right? And this played out pretty big in the news back then, and it offers a really powerful example of what happens when a person, especially if they're a leader, fails to understand who they are. This accident was a failure of a lot of things, but in my mind, it was a failure of introspection at a critical moment, at several critical moments. So a quick overview of what happened. January 13th, 2012, the Costa Concordia is a huge cruise ship. It's got more than 4,000 passengers. I grew up in a town with less people than that, right? And it struck a rock off the Italian island of Giglio, Giglio. I don't know if that's how you say it, but Giglio. And when it hit this rock, it tore a 160-foot gash in the ship's hull, way bigger than what happened to the Titanic, causing it to capsize, and eventually, and miraculously, only 32 people lost their lives. So why did they hit a rock, right? So it occurred after Captain Schettino made a decision to sail very, very close to the coastline, and it deviated from the planned and approved route. It was part of a risky maneuver that cruise ships did every now and again called a salute, right? And basically they're saluting the people that are there on the shore. It's a showboating stunt, right? And what made this incident even more infamous was Schettino's behavior in the aftermath. Rather than staying with the ship and leading the evacuation, as any responsible captain would, he abandoned it, right? And he left behind the passengers and crew before he got them off. So his failure of both judgment and leadership became the subject of international outrage. And there's a lot of people that have written about the Costa Concordia. Afterwards, I invite you to go out and look at all of this, but I'm going to cover a good bit of it here today. So the captain's actions before, during, and after the incident are great examples of how a lack of knowing who you are, right? Introspection, a lack of self-awareness, a lack of emotional regulation, a lack of even any sort of momentary critical reflection, right, can lead to bad decisions with catastrophic outcomes. So who was this guy, right? Before the accident happened, he was known for taking high risks. He was known for cutting corners. This salute maneuver was clearly done to impress people, both on the shore and the locals. He knew it was high risk, but he was used to taking high risks, right? This moment of excitement, right? They're going to love who I am, man. In this moment of excitement, he failed to consider not only the potential consequences, but any safeguards that he could have put in place. Excuse me. I mean, had he taken a minute for even a brief introspection, he might have asked himself, am I prioritizing safety here? What can I do to make damn sure I don't hit any rocks? Or am I letting my ego run away with my decision making? So deviating from the planned route to show off to locals probably seemed harmless to him. He had a blind spot, right? And that blind spot, coupled with his failure to reflect on the importance of safety protocols and procedures, was a critical error. Introspection right here in that moment could have involved a lot of things, reflecting on the responsibility of leadership, thinking about worst case scenarios, potential risks. Was he allowing his personal ambition to overrun his good judgment? All those things in a moment of introspection might have been avoided. But it gets worse. After the ship struck ground, he really freaked out. He made a series of poor decisions that worsened the situation. Instead of quickly assessing that damage and initiating an evacuation, which, by the way, the crew trains for, he panicked, right? He delayed critical orders. He initially downplayed the severity of the incident, right? Until the ship starts to tip over, he was telling everybody, relax, it's okay. So his lack of emotional regulation in this high-pressure scenario clearly reflects an absence of introspection. Yeah, a captain should be prepared to stay calm, evaluate the situation, and act swiftly, but he got stuck in that, I've got to be the cool guy. I've got to stay calm, right? Even when he could have been taking aggressive action that probably would have saved those 30 lives. And then perhaps the most notorious aspect of this disaster was the captain's decision to abandon the ship early, leaving his crew and thousands of passengers behind. So nobody's in charge, right? The Coast Guard actually called him and ordered him to return to the ship to lead the evacuation. And he refused, right? Isn't that wild? Captain of a ship abandoning early, then actually somebody calling him saying, hey, you're the captain of the ship, go back. And he said, I'm not going to. Okay. Crazy. Any sort of self-reflection would have understood what that was going to look like downstream for him, right? So even if it's all about Captain Schettino, he should have been able to recognize what was going on in the moment, but he didn't. He let fear and self-preservation override duty. And that's a pretty sharp contrast with, the law of the sea that says the captain goes down with the ship, or at least the last one off. So looking at this after the incident, he failed to take responsibility. He attempted to shift the blame onto other crew members. And he even argued that he fell into a lifeboat by accident. Apparently not remembering the Coast Guard call that told him to go back, right? So this, once again, refusal to engage in accurate self-reflection or to take accountability, highlights that this guy didn't know who he was. And because he didn't know who he was, because he failed to be introspective enough, it led to not only people dying, but even if it's all about him and his mind, it led to him being a case study in podcasts like this. So if he had practiced even a little bit of introspection before, during, or even after, he might have saved lives. He might have salvaged his reputation. But instead, his lack of self-awareness and failure to accept his role led him to prison and international condemnation. So this whole accident sort of, in a grand way, underscores the importance of introspection, not only in leadership, but for all of us as we lead our own lives. really apparent in visible high-stake environments like this, to consider the weight of your responsibilities and the possible consequences if you don't live up to those responsibilities. And perhaps most important, it gives us an opportunity to look at blind spots, right? Which one of the purposes of introspection is to identify our blind spots. In this particular case, it was ego, overconfidence, and then after it happened, it was fear. Right? And theoretically, if he had known more about himself, he wouldn't have been so prideful. He wouldn't have panicked so much. So, for each of us, enough on the Casa Concordia, for each of us, introspection is effective self-awareness for decision-making. Particularly important when the stakes are high, but always important, right? We become what we routinely do, right? So it's not enough to say, I want to be prepared for the next huge challenge in my life. I think I want to say to myself, I want to be prepared for every challenge of life. And if I can routinely and regularly reflect on my motives, my emotional triggers, my fears, my responsibilities, I'm far less likely to succumb to poor judgment under pressure. And the captain's inability to do so serves as a powerful lesson in why introspection should not be optional. It's essential to becoming who we can be. So now that we kind of understand what it is, let's think about how we do it. Right? And I'm going to give you some personal examples because we have to rely on anecdotes because there's not a lot of real research done into introspection. It's as unique as we are, right? And we're all wildly different, right? I should have used Blue Threat proverb number 2, which says everybody's weird. So for me, I'll tell you what works. I've said many times before, since I'm a writer, I'm also a journaler, right? I take a lot of notes, after action notes, planning notes, and part of that is looking inside, right? So journaling means writing down your thoughts and feelings, your actions, how they may have related to your thoughts and feelings, to reflect on them later, right? So I typically, at the end of every day and every work day, I spend 10 minutes, maybe 15, writing down the types of things that impacted my performance, right? So an example that I can tell you for sure is going to make the journal tonight is a couple days ago, I injured my back, right? Very painful, hard to sit here, hard to stand, hard to move. It's sort of a muscle problem. I'm hoping haven't been to the doctor yet. But that's impacted me in a lot of ways, right? It made it so I couldn't sleep very well. I couldn't sleep in my normal positions. It plagued me to the point where I was sort of obsessed about it, and that didn't allow me to think about other things. So it's important for me in that situation to be ahead of the game, right? So I wrote down, don't leave things for the last minute because you never know when you're going to get your back hurt or something's going to come up. And so that was introspective analysis of perhaps preventing procrastination or leaning forward and getting things done or preparing to have a plan to work through situations like that. Okay? So, I like to ask myself, why did I react the way I did? What triggered it? Were there biases, emotions, preconceived ideas, bad information? What was it that made me do the thing I did? Not necessarily bad, but probably just as importantly, what helped me succeed in something, right? Winston Churchill, I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill. He journaled all the time. And it helped him because he eventually was going to become a writer and all that other stuff. I think he knew that. And so he wanted to keep good personal notes. But he used it to impact how he communicated with the British people, how he communicated with other world leaders. He knew what his strengths were, and he knew what his weaknesses were. And he was a motivator, right? And you can think of all the different Winston Churchill things. One of my favorites, after their victory in North Africa, the first time they beat the Germans anywhere, he said to the British people, he said, "This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." So Churchill. So journaling, that's one. Two, ask yourself some self-audit questions, right? I've got a couple of them. What am I avoiding and why? Is it too hard? Is it emotionally taxing? Is it too boring? What is it that I'm avoiding and why? The second thing I ask myself every afternoon is, what did I do today that I'm really proud of? Where was my best work? What am I not so proud of? What might I even be ashamed of? Good questions, right? One is positive and one is negative, and it helps you to balance it. I always like to start with a positive because I hopefully can find a thing or two that I did well during every day. And then the third question, and this is it, there's only three. What am I avoiding today and why? What am I proud of? What am I not so proud of or ashamed of? And the third one is, what values drove me? What values did I act on? And then again, what values did I betray, right? Did I cut a corner? Did I fail to return a call? Why? Right? Those types of things. You see, those three questions, I'm going to say them again. What am I avoiding and why? What did I do today that I'm proud of or ashamed of? And what values drove those actions? Right? On the good side that I acted on, or on the bad side that I might have betrayed? Because tough questions will always lead to better answers. It'll always lead you to looking at yourself and asking the difficult questions that will uncover the layers of the onion that drive who you are and why you make the decisions you do. It's like holding up a mirror, right? You might not always like what you see, but it helps you grow. Now, a third kind of method or technique for getting at motives, it comes straight out of the accident investigation world. A lot of you have probably heard of it. It's called the 5 why method, right? It's meant to help you drill down to root causes by asking why 5 times. Right? So pick a situation. I don't know. I got in a fight with a family member. Okay. Why? Well, because I overreacted to something that was said. Why? Because I was tired and irritable. Why? Well, I didn't get sleep last night. Why? Because I hurt my back. Why? Because I was in a hurry to do something that I should have waited to get help with. Right? So look at the things I've unlocked there, right? Impulsiveness, in a hurry to get something done. I didn't recognize that I was going to be crabby and snap back emotionally. All those types of things come out of that 5 why method. You can try it with anything, sort of fun. And you can continue to ask why. It could be a 10 whys, right? Why was I irritated? Until you get down to some baseline cause. So why did I snap back at the family member? If you go all the way back to the 5 whys, because I took impulsive action that injured my back, that led to all those other things, lack of sleep, pain, frustration, all those things. Okay, I want to move on now to things that get in the way of us being really good introspectors, right? The first one's a fear of what you might find, right? People avoid introspection because they're afraid that deep inside they might find something they don't like, right? It's easier to paint a picture of who we are than to face the truth, maybe, of who we really are. Okay? There's a real famous example out there. I think I've used her once before, but Elizabeth Holmes was the CEO of Theranos, right, where they said a single drop of blood and we can analyze everything about your health, right? She became very famous. She became very rich in selling this idea, but that's all it was an idea. Right? Had she been a little bit more introspective, it's pretty clear where this is going to lead. If you don't have the technology to back up something that people have just given you billions of dollars for, you better either do one of two things: find it fast, or take the money and run to somewhere without an extradition agreement with the United States. Right? She ignored the reality and just kind of rode the wave right to the downfall of an entire company. And she's still, I believe, doing some serious jail time in a club fed somewhere. So that's an example of fear of what you might find when you're introspective. The second thing we've talked about a little bit with Costa Concordia, and that's ego and pride. Our ego tends to act like a bodyguard, but it's guarding the wrong things, right? It's guarding us from criticism, right? It's guarding us from feeling a little butthurt when somebody says, "Hey, that's not very good work," right? Or "You shouldn't have done that," or "What were you thinking," right? So our ego gets in the way and blocks all that stuff. It makes us very cynical beings. As an aviator, I can tell you on more than one time, especially as an instructor pilot in the B-1, where I thought I pretty much had it all suitcased up, that there was nothing new that I could learn. And that came back to bite me several times, right? Not in any horrific way, but my ego is bruised. And that tends to happen in military debriefs, right? Somebody puts a finger in your chest and says, "Hey, Bubba, what were you thinking out there? Why did you do what you did?" Right? So back to number one was fear of what you're going to find out about yourself. Number two barrier is ego and pride. And number three barrier is a big one for a lot of us, and that's just we're too damn busy to do it, right? We fill ourselves up with all kinds of distractions, and I got soccer games to go to and articles to write and, just everything, right? Busyness isn't productivity, right? Slowing down is critical, and understanding why we do what we do, the whole art of introspection that we're talking about here today, that's valuable time, right? It should be prioritized. I once heard that the Dalai Lama spends at least 2 or 3 hours every day alone in meditation and reflection, right? Dude's got to be one of the busiest guys on the planet. But if he can take 2 or 3 hours out of his day to just chill and be introspective and not just fill his day up with tasks, I should be able to find a half hour. Right? And I think we're going to find that when we do set that aside, it's going to come back to us tenfold. So a couple of success stories. We've told you a failure story. A guy named Ray Dalio is one of the world's most successful hedge fund managers. He wrote a book called Principles. And one of his principles is self-reflection. Right? He spends a lot of time writing about it. And he said that a lot of people are always chasing the data and not chasing their decision process, right? I think he's the founder of Bridgewater Associates, right? And he encourages in his book something he calls radical personal transparency. Radical personal transparency, which is his term for deep introspection. And what it allows him to do is understand the hidden motivations and avoid repeating the errors that they cause. And that helped him build one of the most successful hedge funds in the world, because it allowed him to look at his flaws or his tendencies head on, and understanding them, he could use them to navigate to make better business decisions. So I want to give you a personal example, a very humbling one, of a failure and what I've learned from it. So many, many years ago, this would have been 1974, actually the spring or the fall of 73. I was a senior in high school, a fairly well-documented, pretty good quarterback for a pretty good team, right? And I played at a place called South Lyon High School, and we'd gotten some media press, and I'd made a few all this teams and all that teams as a sophomore and a junior. So this was supposed to be our year. We were coming up on the second or third game of the year against another high school juggernaut, a team called Novi, green and white. I still gives me PTSD thinking and talking about this, but introspection is going to be huge here. So this event has stuck with me for 50 years. And here's what happened. We started out the game. I completed a pass downfield about 25 yards. We got the kickoff. First play, we were moving. I thought, hey, all right, man, we can pick this zone apart. And I looked over to the left, and there was a yellow flag on the ground. It was holding by one of my offensive linemen. So I got pissed off, and I rather than say that's all right, we'll get him next time, I got a little bit angry in the huddle. I said we can't afford those kinds of mistakes. After that, it was all downhill, right? I lost my leadership capability because I lost my cool. Long story short, we're going to get beat 64-0, but that's not the event in and of itself. Later in the game, we're down 21-0, so it's like still a first quarter. We're backed up all the way against our own goal line. And I do a little rollout pass little down and out, should be an easy completion, but they sniffed it out, and they had a blitz coming from the corner. They'd rolled the linebacker out to cover the guy I was going to throw to, and the blocking breaks down. They're all around me. One of the guys punches the ball out of my hands in the end zone, and it's laying there 2 feet away by my feet. And I could have dove down there and covered it for a safety, but I didn't. I just turned away. And in that moment, I realized that in the deepest part of my competitive being, I had quit. Not only had I quit, I was a quitter, right? And that was 50 years ago, and I can hear the sounds of the pads hitting. I can feel the self-loathing of that moment. It's forced me to be introspective, and I vowed I would never, ever be a quitter again. And I don't think I have. Not in 50 years. I still get my butt beat in 1,000 ways, right? Business, family, as a writer, it doesn't matter. I suffer my share of losses, but I never, ever want to feel that way about myself again. So I learned to fight, right, from that moment of debrief and introspection. All right, that's a sad story. A couple of practical tips for starting introspection as a habit, right? First of all, morning routine, spend about 5 minutes reflecting on your goals for the day. But think about it from an introspective point of view. What emotions do I need to manage, right? What's my enemy today? Is it procrastination? Is it time management? Is it distraction, fatigue, my back hurting? And how do I plan to defeat it, right? That gets my brain in the right frame of mind to tackle a day. And then in the evening, when I'm doing my little journaling exercise, what went well, what didn't, and why? And what did I learn about myself today? Okay? So morning, evening, and then weekly reflections. You can either do this on a Friday night or a Monday morning, or I like to do it over the weekend. At the end of the week, review what you learned, right? What patterns am I noticing? What do I need to change? All right, listen, one eye on the clock here. I want to bring this to some sort of sane conclusion. So just to recap some key points, we talked about introspection as an art because there's not a lot of science to it. We talked about some tools, some inquiry methods that can help us grow emotionally, mentally, be stronger decision makers. What we need to realize is that introspection is like sharpening the saw. What Stephen Covey tells us to do is the seventh habit, right? It's not easy. It's not always comfortable, but it makes you more effective in literally every area of your life. Knowing yourself is the first step toward mastering challenges and becoming the best versions of ourselves. And that's what this podcast is all about. Listen, I got a big announcement for you. I was going to wait, but I'm going to roll it out here right now. I want to bring the book cover up. I have been working on a book for 5 years. It's called Armored Knight, The Relentless Pursuit of Resolve, Resilience, and Recovery from Life's Challenges. A lot of the stuff on introspection we just talked about comes out of this book. It is in the hands of the compositor, laying out the pages right now. I've written the last word of it. I'm hoping to have it up on Amazon within a month. So I hope that you'll take a look at this. Once again, my mission in life to help as many as I can, as many ways as I can. This is just another way for me. So call to action here. Take 5 minutes today, at the end of the day, to ask yourself, what did I learn today? Remember, every post game is a pregame, and not just what you learned about a problem or a person, but what you learned about yourself. So next time we're going to talk about how all of this ties into resolve, resilience, and recovery, just like the book says. And I want you to be thinking about it in this light. Knowing yourself will help you bounce back from so many things, because when you start to feel pain, you'll understand why. When you start to feel elation, you'll understand why, right? And once you understand why those things are in place, you can tip that scale one way or another. And typically we want to tip it away from pain and toward joy, right? All right. So until then, please stay curious, stay humble, and remember, no matter how much we learn and how much we try, we're still only human. And that's a pretty powerful thing. I'll see you next time.